Hello, everyone. My name is Eddie Bolen. I'm a pastor at Edgewater United Methodist Church. I'm also a pastor at Midway United Methodist Church. I want to thank you so much for clicking on this video, taking some time to watch this video. I hope that it is extraordinarily helpful for you and can guide you in your spiritual life and where you find yourself on your spiritual journey. I will say that this is part of a series that I have just started. I posted another video last Wednesday, and so I'll continue posting several videos on a topic that's called searching for a more and better life. And that's one of those things that don't just take my words for it, but I encourage you to search your own self and to see what you find about this more and better life. And like I said, this is the second video in this particular series. This one is going to be focused on searching for a more and better life and thinking about secularism, thinking about entering the secular realm. And so we'll get into that. You think, well, I don't really know what that is. We'll get into that. Part of the background for this was the Gospel of Mark chapter 7. So that's a scripture that's going to guide us into this conversation about searching for a more and better life and trying to understand what is this secular element that we have as part of our culture and part of our world, part of our lives. And so that's what we're going to do. But that idea about searching for a more and better life comes from John chapter 10, verse 10. And I also want to say this, that everything that I'm doing, this is some work that I've been doing in continuing education with a wonderful opportunity that was done by the North Alabama Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church, the North Alabama Foundation, who offers some teaching and some leading that is offered by Ron Mortoya, just extraordinary. But that's where a lot of this work that I've been doing over the past couple of months comes from. But this idea about searching for a more and better life comes from John chapter 10, verse 10. In the King James Version of the Bible, it says this. It says, "I have come that they might have life and that they may have it more abundantly." And so that more and better life, and also that wonderful word that says an abundant, more and better life, but also abundantly. But in the Amplified version of John chapter 10, verse 10, it says this: "I came that they may have and enjoy life, and have it in abundance to the full till it overflows." This is what Jesus says. This is the reason that I have come. Jesus says. Also in the Message, "I came so they can have real and eternal life, more and better life than they ever dreamed of." And so what I would like to do is I'd like to invite you to kind of experiment a little bit. Try a Google search for a more and better life. Because like I said, this is what Jesus offers from John chapter 10, verse 10. But these are words that live well beyond words of Scripture. They live well beyond words of Jesus. I do believe that what Jesus does is Jesus gives us a tremendous insight about what it means to have a real life here on earth as well as an eternal life. Also, what it means to have a meaningful life and a better life than you've ever dreamed of. But I encourage you to take a moment and look on Google and just type those searching for a more and better life. You can shorten it even, a more and better life. Take a look on social media. Take a look on Twitter, on Facebook. Take a look at YouTube about a more and better life and see what you discover. Ask people, what does it mean to live a more and better life? Because what happens is that in John chapter 10, not only does Jesus offer these words that I've come that you may have a more and better life, that you may have a better life than you've ever dreamed of. It may be a life that's abundant. But what Jesus does, Jesus begins to show us what does this life look like. You can see this also in Mark chapter 7 that we'll get into in just a minute. But the church is really, and I said, I started this video and said that I have an opportunity to serve two churches, wonderful opportunity to serve two churches. But the church, part of our calling is to be able to take this more and better life of Jesus and sort of model it for people, sort of put it in front of people's lives and say, this is what it looks like. This is what we have traditionally called in the church spiritual formation, but also what does it mean to offer this life to others? And another big thing about what I'm encouraging you, particularly as you're watching this video, is to think about this not only as a private matter for you, not only for some spiritual edification for your own life, but thinking about this, how can we offer this? How can I offer this vision that Jesus is inviting all of us to embrace to other people? And this is what traditionally in the church we've talked about as evangelism. But as we begin to think and begin to imagine what does this more and better life look like in our own lives, I want to encourage you to pay attention to a couple of things. Pay attention to the biblical text. I've already said that Mark chapter 7 is something that we're going to take a look at, but particularly the Holy Scriptures, and think, how do we faithfully communicate those as holy and inspired, and also as a living Bible? But also think about context. What is the context that we are currently, what are the greatest needs that you see around you? What are those needs that are taking place? What's happening in our culture? Context is in a sense, it is what we think about as culture. What's happening culturally? What are the things that are happening around us? But also the human text. So you take that biblical text, you take the context, and then you take the human text. What is the current story of our lives in this particular moment? And I've got a couple of statistics that I think will help us see and help shape this kind of current moment that we see in our human lives. But I got to tell you, this is always a challenge for me, is that what is the story that we're telling ourselves? What is the story that we're living into right now? I know particularly in the churches that I'm serving, we're talking about what is a way that we can live into a sense of renewal in our lives? How can we move in this place where we are living in a sense of letting God renew us in our minds, and also renew us in our lives? And so, but always thinking about that human text. Where's that moment that we're sitting at right now? Wonderful words, shaping a lot of what I've been studying comes from Proverbs chapter 20, verse 5. The purpose of a man's heart are deep waters, but the purpose of all of our hearts are deep waters. And a man or a person of understanding draws them out. So that's what I'm doing, is recognizing that there are some deep waters that are happening in all of our lives. There are some deep waters that are taking place in all of our hearts right now. And so what does it mean to be able to draw those out? Proverbs says that a man is a person of understanding that is able to draw those out. And so that's what I want us to do, is to move toward understanding. A couple of questions, and these are, again, questions that have been offered by Ron Mortoya and that some of that continuing ed that I've been doing over these past few months. Why is it so hard? Why is it so hard? Why is it so difficult to be a leader right now? And also, why are people leaving the church and turning to other sources right now? That is, that the church, which is called to model this more and better life of Jesus. Why are so many people trying to look for a more and better life in other sources? They've turned away from the church. And so what I did last week in the previous video that I was posting on this searching for a more and better life, so I encourage you to take a look at Mark chapter 7. So I hope that you did. If you notice, if you take a look at Mark chapter 7, it's a fairly long chapter. I mean, it's not extraordinarily long, but I mean, there's a lot that's taking place here. But what you will notice is that Jesus immediately encounters some Pharisees and some scribes. These are religious leaders. So Jesus encounters some religious leaders. That's the majority of the chapter. And then if you come down to about verse 31, then you will find that Jesus encounters some real needs, some people that need some healing, and Jesus reaches out to them. Jesus offers some healing to them. So that's basically what Mark chapter 7 is. But very interesting, and I just want to highlight a couple of things about Mark chapter 7, is that what Jesus encounters is that the Pharisees and scribes have noticed that the disciples are not washing their hands before they eat in a ceremonial way. That is, they are coming to the table with clean hands. They are washing their hands, but they're not doing this in a ceremonial way. And so Jesus turns toward the religious leaders, and he says, well, you know your scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures. He says to them, it says from the prophet Isaiah, and this particularly verse 6 and 7, Mark 7, verse 6 and 7, the people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. And so what Jesus does is he steps into this moment, recognizes the kind of biblical text that is intended to inform their lives, and says, you know, what you've done is that you've added some human elements to it. And this is what the disciples are not observing. They're not observing those human elements. Again, he will begin to talk, and particularly this comes in verse 8 and 9. Jesus will begin to talk about the commandments. And it says, you know, one of your commandments, not only do you have the Holy Scriptures from the prophet Isaiah, but one of your commandments says that you should honor mother and father. And yet you have part of your human tradition, part of your current cultural moment, you have a concept where you can give an offering to the temple, an offering, a korban, and you can pay that offering, and then you can, in a sense, ignore your own parents, your own human parents. And so Jesus begins to not only enter into the biblical text and into those conversations, but he begins to enter into the cultural moment that they find themselves in. And the disciples will turn to Jesus. They say, we just don't understand, Jesus. And Jesus says, well, it's very clearly says that what comes into your heart, this is what matters. Because your heart, out of your heart, this is where evil intentions arise, and Jesus will begin to describe them. But then Jesus notices, then Jesus will move into this very human textual kind of moment when people who are hurting, and particularly a Gentile woman, will approach Jesus and ask for Jesus to relieve a demon that is affecting her daughter. Jesus will say, well, you're Gentile. In fact, Jesus will say it like this. He says, well, let the children be fed first. That is, those who I've come to. This is particularly Mark chapter 7, verse 27. Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food, throw it to the dogs. She says, sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. Essentially, Jesus has said, I've come to the scribes, I've come to the Pharisees, I've come to the people of Israel. Now, as the Gentiles who are here, as they are able to receive the crumbs, then their lives will be changed too. But that's not the reason that I've come. I've come, in a sense, to offer this life to those first, to those people who are practicing Jewish people. And she says, but wait a minute, even a dog is able to eat the crumbs under a table. And Jesus says, you're exactly right. And Jesus relieves that demon from her daughter in that moment. This will also, you'll begin to see where Jesus will feed and heal many Gentiles, just tremendous ways of Jesus reaching out to Gentile people. And so Jesus does both things at once. Jesus is able to offer his life to those who are Jewish, as well as his life to those who are Gentile. And so this is an extraordinary chapter that is there. So I encourage you to dive into it, and particularly to pay attention. Pay attention to, even this. Begin to ask yourself, what's the backdrop of the life that Jesus calls us to live in John chapter 10, verse 10? If Jesus called us to lean into and live a more and better life, what is Jesus doing in Mark chapter 7? How do we see this more and better life emerging? What is the context of the good life? What is Jesus saying? And to this woman who is suffering because of her daughter who has been affected by this demon, what is the context? What's the shape of the good life for her? What's the context and the shape of the good life for her daughter? And to begin to offer, how do we offer this to others? As we see with Jesus at first says, I've come to those who are first. The children are going to be fed first. And yet Jesus is convinced by what he sees in this woman's life, and also by what her daughter is experiencing, to offer this deliverance from this demon, as well as at the very end of Mark chapter 7, to offer a man who is blind, unable to speak well, is able to touch him and is able to bring healing as well as speech to him. You will notice, if you take a look in Mark chapter 7, verse 34, this is a very old tradition. It's a very ancient. Mark is the first gospel writer. In fact, is the oldest gospel that we have. But he will say, apatha, which is an Aramaic term. Jesus speaks in Aramaic. Traditionally, the New Testament was translated into Greek, but Jesus spoke in Aramaic, and that is one of the words that Jesus was said. That was Jesus' vernacular. That was his common language, which means nothing more than be open. But it's one of those moments, Mark chapter 7, verse 34, we have we have actually what Jesus spoke in that moment, which is extraordinarily helpful and also encouraging to have this. Now, I did say this. I did say that we're going to talk about this kind of secularism that emerges in our midst. The Pew Research Forum discovered in 2021 some surveys that were beginning to emerge as 2021. You notice this is a year into the COVID moment, into the global pandemic of the coronavirus, or COVID-19. But the Pew Research Forum in 2021 discovered that 50%, under 50% people in the United States were attending church. They discovered that there were less than 50% of people that were actually attending church. And then a little bit later than that, Barna Research is a Christian organization that is connected as a division of Lifeway. But they discovered that over 60% of millennials said, you know what? And I don't know how you think about millennials. Millennials are people who are 45 and under right now. But over 60% of millennials said it's okay if they never return to church. They never come back to church. And so thinking about that, this moment that we find ourselves in, Charles Taylor is a wonderful sociologist, Roman Catholic sociologist, wrote a book called A Secular Age. But his academic orientation training is in sociology. And in fact, James K.A. Smith, a Christian, a Protestant Christian, also wrote a book in response to Charles Taylor called How Not to Be Secular. Very influential. But what Taylor offers is he offers this idea that says 500 years ago that it was impossible to see an atheist. So imagine this, again, Charles Taylor in the secular age, but says 500 years ago, it was impossible to see someone who was an atheist. Think about all the way back to scriptures. Those people that Jesus was encountering, none of those was impossible just to be an atheist. Secularity, involves, again, Charles Taylor says that secularity, involves this idea of privatization, where there is a separation between our public lives and our private lives. It says it's a pre-secular world before we come into this secular world that is secularity that we are living in, that is a part of our lives right now. And in the pre-secular world, the church was at the forefront of shaping the good life and called it the common good. It wasn't a spiritual life. It wasn't religious practices. It was referred to as the common good. However, people are in a place where they perceive of God as a private matter now, and it's a big kind of cleavage that affects every single one of us. And in fact, ethics are considered private and individual. And you've probably noticed this because when all of us talk about polite conversations, what do we agree to not discuss? Well, there is religion, there is money, there is sex, there is politics. Those are considered private matters. And I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but if somebody brings them up, they, at times, at a dinner party, if they bring them up out, in parties and social settings, they're described as just being rude. I know that when I encounter my dry cleaners, when I sit down to get my haircut, when I'm in the bank or something like that, people ask, what do you do? I say, well, I'm a pastor. There's oftentimes just this dead silence that is there because this is a private matter. Religion, money, sex, politics, all private matters as well as others, but it affects us. Our ethics are considered to be private matters now. And so this idea about why is it so hard to be a leader right now is because we are dealing with private ways of understanding God and living the good life. This is one of the challenges that we face together in this moment that we find ourselves in now. And this is something that's been going on for several years now. March 31st, 2015 article in the New York Times is by Colson Whitehead, but it's described as how you do you perfectly captures our narcissistic culture. You've probably seen articles about narcissism, a rise in narcissism. You've probably seen articles about a rise in people who are turning toward themselves, people who are being selfish. You're probably starting to see conversations about people who are diverging into their own tribes and coming together right now in those moments like that. But one of the elements of that is that, I'm going to live my life, you live your life. You don't tell me how I live my life, and I won't tell you how to live your life. It's a wonderful article. Again, it's 2015. It's amazing. But how you do you. You do your life, I'll do my life, and then we'll keep that separate. And so our challenge and the kind of way that we live this life that Jesus says is more and better life, a good and abundant life that is for all of us. That all of us can live and that we can live it together, which is what we do together when we come together in a community in the church. However, it's increasingly hard because we do take with us these kind of secular ideas, these kinds of private ideas and saying, you know what, religion and faith is something that's private in my own life. And so what is the good life to you as a disciple of Jesus Christ? And also, I want you to think about this. I want you to begin to ask yourself this. What is the good life that you can then offer to other people? And how is the good life, as modeled by Jesus, guiding you and leading you in your church, in your community, in your experience, among your family, among your friends, even among your Sunday school class, maybe among your prayer group? And so what I want to do is next time I'm going to post a video next Wednesday, describing this idea of living into this good life, but also another thing that sociologists pay attention to, not only in Christianity, but all religions, called the 3 B's: believing, behaving, and belonging. What does it mean to believe? What does it mean to behave? What does it mean to belong? And so what I want to do is I want to invite you to take a look at Galatians chapter 4, just the first 19 verses. So not the whole chapter, but Galatians chapter 4, and to begin to notice what does this say about belief? How is this informing believing, also behaving, and also belonging? And I want to end with some words from an address by Diana Butler Bass, wonderful author, but an address to the Pacific Northwest Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. This was July 3rd, 2012. This is when their annual conference was coming together, is the Pacific Northwest Annual Conference. And this is what Diana Butler Bass, this is what she spoke, this is what she shared with them. When talking about spirituality, the 3 B's: believing, behaving, and belonging, are still important, but their emphasis changes from what you believe to how you believe, from what you do to how you act, and from what is your membership to who you are. This change results in a focus on relationships and community. And that's one of the things about it, is that there is this move, this shift, and it's really subtle at times, but there is this shift where in the midst of what has been described by sociologists as a private realm, where there is this shift where people are wanting to be parts of communities. They're wanting to have deeper relationships with one another. And so think about that. Think about that believing, that behaving, that belonging, particularly as you're reading Galatians chapter 4, verse 1-19. I also want to end with a quote from Diana Butler Bass. Again, this is July 3rd, 2012, addressed to the Pacific Northwest Annual Conference. She says, hope is elusive. I love this. Hope is not just a word. It's something that we have to work on. And so just imagine that. When's the last time that you said, you know what, I've got to work on hope? It's something we do together. Hope is something we do together. It's not something that just happens in our private lives, in our individual lives that are separated. But hope is something that we do together. According to Bass, people love to talk about decline, but they fear talking about awakening. If you notice a couple of the statistics that I've offered today, as well as in a previous video, emphasize decline. But people love to talk about decline, but they fear talking about awakening, which she defines as the breaking in of God to our lives. And so, as I have raised this idea about public and private and the secular and the influence that it has on all of us as followers of Jesus Christ, and all of us as we seek to live a good life in our own lives, know this, that there are moments of awakening. And that's what I hope that we can discover together, moments of awakening where God is breaking into our lives. And I do leave you with those words and say that as much as we love to talk about decline, look for and notice those moments of awakening. Well, I hope that this has been helpful for you. I would love to hear any thoughts or any comments that you have on these matters, which is just extraordinary, this moment that we find ourselves in. But look for those moments where God is breaking into your life as well as the lives of others. Well, thanks for watching. I hope that all of you are blessed by God and that you see God encountering your life. Thanks again for watching.